Have you ever wondered what it would be like to send a message to the stars? With Project StarBeam now you can. Personal interstellar messages let you share your thoughts, dreams, and wishes with the universe itself. Your message is encoded and beamed into space, your words traveling where no one has gone before. Visit projectstarbeam.com today and send your own PIM. The stars are waiting. Welcome to the Project StarBeam podcast. We're humanity's interstellar message service, where you can beam your personal messages to the stars. Why send messages? Most scientists agree aliens are out there somewhere. They may be listening, and we target the best listening sites. Aliens who can hear us are also beings we can learn from, maybe having solved the social problems we face today. We do this not because it is easy, but because it is hard. It demands high technology, art, bringing people together from around the world, and along the way, we learn while having fun. We are Project Starbeam.
Thank you, Dr. Daystrom. My name is Chris Kent, co-host. I'm the Chief Science Officer of Project Starbeam. My background is computer science, biology, education, space studies, and entrepreneurship.
And I am Dr. Michael Daystrom, co-host and Chief Executive Officer of PSB. My background is engineering, computer science, space studies, cryptography, and business strategy. Now for our first segment.
Well, hello, Dr. Daystrom. Today, we've got an excellent show planned, and it spans the galaxy. And I think, as we discussed before the show, the first segment is all yours.
Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm just going to let everybody know that I'm on is it my third or fourth cup of coffee already today? So I am highly caffeinated. I'll leave it at
That's
that.
scientist fuel, right?
Exactly, exactly. Okay. Anyway, so our topic today is going to be basically discussing um, John von Neumann and his thoughts on creating basically micro robots to help us explore the galaxy. All right. So imagine sending out a single robot explorer into space that could make copies of itself. Now imagine those copies making more copies, spreading across the galaxy like a cosmic family tree. That's the fascinating concept of von Neumann's probes, named after, again, mathematician John von Neumann. So the basic concept is creating self-replicating space robots. This is theoretical still, of course. Okay. And basically, we can send them into space and they actually become their own self-sustaining factories, if you will, because they can make copies of themselves. And as they move forward, and the need appears, they can make additional copies of themselves. And part of this is basically to explore the galaxy without humans having to do it directly. Now, we all realize we're going to eventually have to do all that directly, but the kind of data that we could accumulate in the process of using these devices could just be absolutely awesome. Now how they would work, okay, this is the cool factor, if you will, okay. Land on a planet or asteroid, gather raw materials. They could build exact copies of themselves using these materials. Each copy travels to a new star system and repeats the process. Now, that's kind of cool from that perspective, but I sit back too and I look at, as a sci-fi as a sci-fi enthusiast, I kind of look at some episodes of the Stargate series where they had these micro robots that pretty much began to take over everything. And we certainly want to avoid that. So if you want to jump in here, please go
For,
ahead.
for sure, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, we also that they often talk, especially with the nanotechnology, they often talk about gray goo, where I mean, if it's true nanotechnology, it really doesn't need to have it doesn't need to be shaped like a box or it can just be goop, right? And it would just be an undifferentiated color. Now, the good part about this is when you talk to, when you're in the field of nanotechnology,
Mhm.
and most people say it's not, most scientists in that field say it's not a concern because there's been one very, very clever, well, let's say clever is maybe the wrong word, one very, very adaptive um, architect trying to essentially do that for, several billion years, and that's nature, right? If it were possible to have to have basically a bacteria, which is roughly the scale we're talking about for nanotechnology, if it were possible to have a bacteria that could self-replicate and just eat anything, right? It would have already happened. Nature would have happened upon it. So, life actually gives us a little bit of a guidance. And the other interesting thing that gives us a guidance, and this is something that uh, you know this is something that makes it essentially possible. We know it's possible to do this. If you wanted to do it at a larger scale, if you wanted to do it at, say, the scale of a factory, right? We know we could build a factory. We know we can build things that mine. I mean, we build everything that goes into a factory already, right? We just don't do it at one spot, and we don't have a giant vehicle that we can make it mobile with. But we know what all of this is possible. All the steps do work, right?
They
Um,
do. And, if I might,
yeah,
just
yeah, go
mention
ahead.
that they do. But, one of my, uh, I guess, warning signals in reference to this, okay, is making sure that, the systems as they develop and evolve, okay, that we have the right accountability components built into them.
Well, yeah, yeah,
Because, at the right time, we don't want the nanotechnology to all of a sudden decide that we humans are kind of being a pain,
yeah,
okay,
right.
and so forth. Okay, but in addition to that, we also need to make sure that there's some transparency relevant to um, the information that we're receiving back, and
Hmm.
that nothing's being held back by the very devices that are out there exploring the galaxy without us. But and building, and this is kind of critical, making sure they're not building their own culture. And
Yes.
those are things that's, again, another part of the technology is explainability. We have to make sure that, what we're being told or what, we're seeing or hearing is explainable.
Now, the interesting thing, not necessarily von Neumann probes, but probes in general. There is actually a project working on that called Project Starshot. And it's being done amongst a number of other similar interesting projects by a billionaire called Yuri Milner. And Starshot, the way it goes is, we don't have the technology really to launch anything of any real scale at speeds that are approaching light speed. We just don't have the tech for it. The best that we can do is we can build a rather large set of lasers, and these are going to be very expensive, and it's going to stress our technology. These are basically like the similar in scale to the Hubble Space Telescope, right? And they'd have to, of course, be in orbit. And what they do is they would basically take these little chips and little attached sails. These are photon sails, laser
Mhm.
sails, and and we're talking ships of a gram or less, so very, very small. And they're, if once in a while I tap into some of the work that's being done there, and it's very interesting because we're not even close to the whole self-replicating aspect. And that's something that I mean, maybe with a lot of progress, maybe in a few decades, maybe. Um, but the challenge set for just the probes is very interesting because if you fire it out on the laser and it's sailing out there, and what their goal is 0.2 C, so 20% the speed of light. So that means a multiple of 5 on any travel time in number of light years, right? So something going to Alpha Centauri, which is about approximately 4 light years away, would be a 20-year journey at point 2C. And so the problem is, though, that there's no way to slow down. So you're going to have to send out a cloud of these things and multiple waves of these things. And they're going to have to, number one, have some means, even just on this tiny chip, of getting useful data. So like some sort of really tiny miniature camera, really tiny radars, and then they got to send the signal back. And I mean, that's actually where I've run into it is these things are going to have tiny amounts of power, just unimaginably small, like an RFID, like an RFID chip, similar amounts of power. And they've got to now collectively, this is where they're thinking about as a swarm, right? They've got to collectively work together to send back a signal in phase that's strong enough for us to read it back here. So it's just it is really some sci-fi stuff that's happening in real life. But the good news is that I think we don't have to worry about being taken over by robotic replicators. I think the Stargate scenario is still a ways away. So
well, and I think what's kind of interesting is this, as a society, okay, which is, we've been around quite a while now with space and exploration and so forth, right? There's a lot of sci-fi, if you will, that is evolving into true science. And those
true.
are things that, we need to make sure that we embrace and we understand. Okay. The other thing that I do want to bring up, and this is in reference to, the surveillance aspect, is uh, have aliens deployed that type of technology here
Well,
or
that's
to other
it.
civilizations as well? Okay, so, are they watching us? And if they are, okay, what are they learning? That's a whole different conversation. But B, um, where's that information actually going? But yeah, that's that's quite a different topic. But
Yeah, I was listening to another podcast, and I think it was Dr. Brian Keating, and he has all sorts of wonderful guests on. And they were talking about precisely this kind of thing,
Mhm.
SETI and aliens and whatnot, but like we do, in a very scientific, very evidence-based and grounded fashion. And I wish I could remember the name of the physicist, but he was saying that essentially, once we go out and once we actually get close enough and are exploring places like our Kuiper belt, like the Oort cloud, given the time span of the galaxy, given that, and I'll get into this in the next segment much more, but given how long it takes for a civilization to do something like this, where you're sending it at maybe 10% or 20% the speed of light, because it's got to slow down, right? And so we could actually have layers and layers and layers of multiple civilizations of ancient probes and whatnot, just littering our solar system. And now this is also where, if you look at what's going on with the UAP lore, UFOs, modern parlance, UAP is unidentified anomalous phenomenon. But let's just talk about the UFOs part of that, where you have ships, and they're like the ones that are described in like the Roswell account, which we'll get into later, or your classic, I mean, it looks like it's an aerospace craft, this kind of thing, and we can shoot them down. And people say, well, these aliens must be so advanced. How would we possibly shoot them down? Why would they be like our craft? Well, they're dealing with some pretty crazy limits. They've got to basically, if they want to craft here like that, they're not sending the craft. They're sending the von Neumann probe. The von Neumann probe has the instructions and has a tiny microfactory that's now got to build a big factory, that's now got to clone the pilots if you want grays or whatever, because they just might be biological robots. I mean, that's the most plausible thing. And you got to put this all all in the little Pandora's chest. And yeah, it's, I find it very plausible that given all the limits, and we're exploring some of those limits with how to build these things, like just going with factories.
Right.
Elon Musk, if you recall, because I know you follow the manufacturing very closely, if you recall his first generation of factories that were a failure because he wanted to do the super robotic factories. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
I do.
So, and then when he actually got to a design that worked, it turns out that you had to, like the technology we have at the moment is just not flexible enough, is just not adaptive enough, even at a factory scale, to make just one product. It's not a factory making a factory, it's just a factory making cars. And it's still not flexible enough to, because there's so many limitations and so many parts and so many processes that you got to put together. And
Yeah.
so I think it's quite plausible that you could see some craft like UFOs, like people report, that really aren't all that great. Like we're not talking about big star cruisers that came from another. We're talking about local stuff built in the asteroid belt, built in the Oort cloud, you know. And
Well, and
that's all within the realm, right? Within the realm of von Neumann probes.
it is. And, kind of coming back to that, this is something that's very, very critical that we just have to keep in mind as this technology begins to evolve, and more importantly, we begin to deploy it, okay, within the process itself. Um, and this is just a key question to kind of everybody should keep in the back of their heads as we move on to the next segment is um, who's really in charge? So with the factory, I'll use that as a, as, just one component, okay,
Hmm,
within a factory, okay, and I do have a very strong manufacturing background, all right, but making sure that uh, all of the systems A are working the way they're supposed to work. That's one layer, okay. But in addition to that, there does have to be somebody in some capacity running the show to make sure that the factory doesn't A, get out of control, or B, either run out of materials or, not quite understand the challenges of the very processes, which could change literally daily if need be. So
right.
it's just something to, it's just something that every,
Yeah, because
every,
you don't know where you're going to find the next deposit of magnesium that you need or whatever, right? You just don't. There's all the random variables that come from just existence, right?
well,
So
and that's true, but not only that, okay, within within the structure, which, and again, I think the direction of the probes and so forth is a great way to go. Okay. But again, we always have to remember to maintain who's truly in charge. And the last thing we would want to have is a series of probes who've kind of separated based on one group of probes is handling asteroids, another group of probes might be on some planet somewhere. But at some point in time, if they reunite for any reason, we have to make sure that um, that's managed
yeah,
because
true,
you gotta question, with the evolution of AI intelligence factored into this as well. All right, we just have to make sure that one group of probes does not get angry with the other group
right, right,
because they haven't really been communicating for say 150 years, that sort
yeah,
of thing. So we just have to make
or
sure that,
150,000 years, right?
or okay, or yeah, whatever that
Yeah,
happens to be.
exactly. Yeah,
But yeah, so in closing, I just I really applaud um, um, von Neumann's idea in reference to the probes and so forth. I could see this really becoming a necessary component to what we're doing. It could plug into multiple places within exploration, but it's just, again, we just have to make sure that we're keeping tabs on it somehow. Before we move on to the next topic, we ask that you support this podcast, the project, and all of our educational programs for students in need. All you need to do is send PIMS, your personal interstellar messages. While we are a startup, sending a PIM gives you lifetime honorary membership in our community. This is a legacy, your carefully chosen words beamed to the stars, and lifelong fellowship in a good cause. Visit projectstarbeam.com to send your personal interstellar messages today. Now back to the episode.
We talk about, of course, a lot of different things communicating via, our personal interstellar messages with the cosmos, and the frequency of where the aliens are, because we don't know. So that leads to the inevitable question of how many alien civilizations are out there right now. And this is something that, like much like Professor von Neumann back in the day, because I believe he started to do most of this work. I think he did it in the 40s.
Right.
But like the 40s, the 50s, and to the 60s were a really incredibly rich time for all of this stuff. And you run into a fellow named Frank Drake. Dr. Drake is known for the Drake equation. And so what he did was he lined up a bunch of variables, and I won't go through it now because a podcast is, we don't have a blackboard, it's not a lecture. But he lined up all the variables in, okay, how many planets are there? Do they have a biosphere? And these are all filters, right? How long does the civilization last? Do civilizations last a long time? How long does it take life to get to civilization? How long does technology take to develop? And so he lined up all of these things in what's called the Drake equation. And back in that day, people really underestimate, people really overestimate how much we've known for a long time. Like it's only in the early 1900s, 1910, 1920, that we really realized that there's more than just the galaxy out there. For a long time, it was thought that other galaxies were stars. Like we just couldn't see. The instruments weren't good enough. And it's only in the 90s when we started to actually find exoplanets. I mean, scientists were sure that there's lots of planets out there, but they had no proof, right? The theory lined up, but it's only like the 90s and the 2000s when we started doing these surveys, especially with space telescopes and whatnot, that we found lots and lots of exoplanets. And so now that we know there's lots of planets out there, and we're talking in our galaxy, we're talking billions and billions of planets. And now in the Drake equation, the next question comes, basic life, right? And we're pretty sure, as we've mentioned in our first podcast, actually, we're pretty sure that basic life is out there and it's pretty common. And we haven't proven that yet. But we have a lot of different environments on Earth. And so we've looked at extremophiles. Basically, we looked at places on Earth, so like near the bottom of the ocean or under the ice or in the ice at the poles. These places where there are environments out there similar to those little environments here on Earth. And the reason they're called extremophiles is because these are extreme, like very high temperatures, very cold, very little food. And so basically, we're pretty sure that life here, because it can survive in these tough conditions, we know that those conditions exist in a lot of places out in the galaxy. Now the question becomes, how long does it take for intelligent life and like complex life and then intelligent life to come about? So this has been even in the last 10 years, this has been a real subject of controversy. Now, the old estimate, and this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this, actually. It's a very nerd thing to get excited about. But the old estimate was that we have here on Earth, Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago, right? 4.4, we have the first evidence of oceans. And then 3.5 to 3.8 microfossils. We're discovering the early microbial life, right? So you'd think that gives us, oh, wow, that's really early life, but it takes a long time to get to complex life. And this is where the concern became, that maybe the universe, like intelligent life and multicellular life, higher life forms are not that common. Now, for us, multicellular life, even though the planet has had life for 3.5 to 3.8 billion years, multicellular life only began about 600 million years ago. And that's a lot less time, especially when you go in and you gauge it against the age of the galaxy and whatnot. Because of course we can tell stellar ages and whatnot quite easily. And then it's only 65 million years until you have, our particular species, mammals, right, which got very complex, and you have some dinosaur descendants like birds, which are also actually have really, really complex reasoning skills. But basically, like before you get the candidates they're not intelligent yet, but before you get the candidates where you could say, okay, this is something there could be intelligence arising. It's about 50 million years. That's a very small window in the age of the Earth, right? So how long, as a guess, you probably know, of course, but how long as a guess do you think maybe we might have until life is extinguished on the planet?
That's a good question. And I'll tell you what, I think that given the age of the Earth, which, technically we're newbies, if you will, on this
Right?
planet compared to others, other life forms that have been here. All right. But things go in cycles. And, if you're familiar with the multiple mass extinctions, which have occurred here on Earth, there will come a time when it'll be um, um, basically time for humanity to either move on, okay, to someplace else, or basically absorb the fact that life will come to an end on this planet. Now, it's not going to be tomorrow, obviously, but could be a million years from now or whatever it happens to be. But in parallel with that, we have to make sure that we, as a civilization, are looking for other civilizations or opportunities for us to move on to
Right.
yeah. But I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting too, because I mean, when you look at again, everything that's been going on now, and I'm not going to get into this debate, which is, the whole climate change piece and so forth,
Right.
right?
Right.
The climate has changed before. And on a couple of different occasions, the climate changed. This was well before humans were here. Okay. The climate changed and did cause some pretty major mass extinctions. And it goes with the flow. That's
Yeah.
it. So, as a species and this is back to a point you were making earlier, from an intellectual perspective, um, we've moved along pretty far. Okay. Are we the sharpest beings that ever been on this planet? That's
Who
that's
knows,
a
right?
good
Who
yeah,
knows? Yeah.
that's a great question. Okay, now the
Yeah.
good news is we're still here. Technology is evolving, and along with intellect and interest and so forth, those are great. But we have to do something to reach out to others that are out there. Okay, or maybe take the time to understand that there might be others here that are not
Right.
necessarily watching us, so to speak, but maybe they've stopped by and are kind of taking note of everything that's going on. So, these are things that they could pass along back to their own civilizations.
That's true. And it's interesting. You mentioned the million year mark, and that's what a lot of scientists settle on for like how long we could exist in some current form of
Right.
something similar to us, right? I mean, we might end up like the yeah, the people from the future in the 1950s films where they all have big heads or something, right? Like, but it'll be something human-esque, right?
Right.
And of course they're talking like, we're not cutting the time spans too finely here. So, a million years is a very round number.
Right.
But yeah, we're probably uh, past that. We're probably going to be, if we don't go and move and spread and, basically take steps to remain somehow human, we're probably not going to be recognizable if our descendants are still around. And life itself, now here is the interesting thing. And life itself has a few limits. And they're thinking, the thinking for a long time has been that it's photosynthesis is the limit on Earth. Of when photosynthesis stops working because the temperatures climb too high, and now we're talking very, very high. We're not talking climate change stuff. We're talking the sun expanding and getting brighter because the sun is slowly getting brighter, and so more energy coming in.
Right.
They used to think it was 900 million years ago. Sorry, 900 million years that we had left. And that was based on a calculation done where the temperature would probably exceed the limit where photosynthesis was viable. So the biosphere collapses, right? You might have some hangers on for a while, like there might be some juicy bits, and fungi can live for another 500,000 years eating the leftovers.
Right.
But ultimately, it's not a viable system anymore, right? It just begins to cook, right? Well, they actually moved that up. And by the way, that 900 million years. So, let's say it's a billion years because we have 50 million years, let's say 100 million years on, when life could have arisen, like when there was really complex stuff. Maybe it could have happened 100 million years ago. Let's just say round a billion years. When they plugged that into the Drake equation, um, when they plugged that in, it didn't look good. The news did not look good for how many, civilizations there could be in the galaxy. The number was, very small, maybe even zero, obviously one, right? If you count Earth as an intelligent civilization. Some people would disagree. On some days, yeah, some days I'd agree with them. Um, but the new, the Drake equation turned out to not be good. But they were going off of the form of photosynthesis that was most common in our biosphere. Well, there are several other forms of photosynthesis that, while not as efficient, what they um, what they do is they use other metabolic pathways and slightly different spectra of light. But the key thing is they can take higher temperatures. So, and I'd have to go back to, I don't really have the notes on that one, but they were looking at something like, I believe it was 65 degrees Celsius was when the photosynthesis started to really peter
Mhm.
down, and um, and now the less common version, which could sustain a very rich biosphere, no problem, right?
Yeah.
Um, the less common version, or some other adapted, version, was something like 85 degrees, right? And so what that added on to the calculation was another 900 million years. So it almost doubled the amount of time that there is for complex life to have a civilization, right? And we know that the complex life getting to intelligence, we know that is the big step, because we've only been around for, as in our current biological form, we've only been around for, maybe 200,000 years, something like that, like if you're talking us exactly. And then culturally, we not have had the flower of culture where, we started to do agriculture and, get on the path of being technological. We may not have had that for much more than, 100,000 years is the outside possibility, and probably more like 50. And it's very difficult to get evidence back in the day.
Right. Right.
Everything, like you said, like we could, because things disappear, even if you make them out of metal, unless you carve them out of stone, everything just degrades, right? So if you're a hunter-gatherer civilization, which might be very rich, it might be you might build big cities out of wood, and you might have lots of culture and medicine and whatever. But if it's all made out of non-durable goods, I mean, it's gone. Traces are gone in a couple thousand years,
Oh,
right?
that's absolutely correct. And kind of coming back to the climate change piece for just a second. Okay.
Right.
Um, there is a science behind it, right? And the it's like I said, we've had mass extinctions before because the climate changed. Okay. But if anybody believes they are going to fix that problem within years, okay, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's just, it's, again, I'm not being, critical of the climate change folks because they are correct. Climate does change. All right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a science behind that. But that word I just used, okay, there's science behind it. See, that's critical because, a lot of times what'll happen is the science piece, kind of gets absorbed into politics and whatnot. Okay, and it just gets degraded over time and brought out and projected as being something that we've got to change this tomorrow because if we don't, okay, again, not trying to be critical, but at the end of the day, it's very important that we all maintain and respect the science behind it. Okay.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And
We got
yeah,
to we got to avoid, we got to avoid people who want to make, well, frankly, want to make money out of fear. And we got to avoid people who, um, and nations and whatnot that are also paying lip service to to climate change and whatnot, but then just not following the rules everyone agrees on. I mean, it's a difficult situation
well,
that we're in now. Yeah.
it is. You are absolutely correct. And so, if we take um, that topic out for just a second and kind of talk about the evolution of science and technology over the last roughly 150 years, but more so accelerated, I would say, from the 1930s forward.
Hmm.
And even if you look at how technology, say in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, has evolved at the rate that it has, I don't believe that mankind or humanity has seen anything in history accelerate at the rate that it is now. This is in reference to technology. It's everything from communication to aeronautics and space and so forth. Okay,
Yeah, the whole modern world. Yeah.
the whole modern world. All right, now that itself is pretty awesome, but making sure that we focus on the future because that's absolutely critical. Okay. B, again, making sure that the systems we have out there and that people are projecting as fact are actually accountable for what we're being told. Okay. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that we prepare ourselves to move on in reference to exploring, the possibilities within our own solar system and the galaxy and so forth. But also, we have to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that there's others out there that, frankly, over time have discovered us and kind of nodded their heads and went, okay,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
next year or
Yeah.
or whatever. Okay.
Or at least
Or yeah,
at least the science indicates there are others out there. We because
right.
I just wanted to clarify for the audience, we don't have any kind of a not that we could tell you if we did, we'd have to deny it. But we don't have any kind of a top secret clearance, with the CIA or something like that. But the science does. I mean, as you know, as we're going through, right, this segment and the last segment kind of
Mhm.
couple together because now we're
Yep.
reasonably sure the timescales allow for biospheres to come and
Yep.
then complex life and then intelligence. And as you just said, look at just the last couple hundred years. It's really when we've done 99% of our technology. right? I mean,
Yeah.
technology for all accounts, unless we're some sort of brilliant super genius species, which I doubt. I mean, we're clever enough, right? We're clever,
Absolutely.
but I doubt we're on the super high end of the curve. Um, I think technology itself is just something that happens fast, especially at the beginning. You know?
Yeah, and this is a little bit about what we're building with Project Starbeam, is the fact that if some person has an idea or a concept that they want to try to put out there from either a technology level, okay, or simply some observations that we all should be aware of. This is part of the Starbeam project in reference to making sure that we develop the resources and mechanisms for those that want to learn. Uh, can have the resources available that can basically change humanity. That's
Mhm.
and maybe change is the wrong word. Uh, Move humanity forward. Okay.
Yeah, we'll definitely
Yeah.
meet a lot of the challenges I think that we,
Yes.
you
Yep.
know, and I think that's the thing too. Like, once you get into it, especially if you don't need that much technical background to really to get very deep into a lot of these subjects. And it's fascinating because, I mean, people have seen sci-fi and people can imagine other species and other cultures. And then, we think about like, well, what have we talked about today? We've talked about, solar system exploration, um, you know, and of course, there's all the negative stuff, right? How do we avoid climate disaster? All of these things are wrapped up with, oddly enough, with aliens and,
Yep.
the search for life. And as an educational angle, um, because it's so fun to talk about a lot of this stuff and it's very popular now.
Let's take a moment for this important message. Project Starbeam invites you to boldly go where no one has gone before. With personal interstellar messages, your words can travel to the stars, seeking out new life and new civilizations. Whether it's a wish, a memory, or a message for the future, send it out into the universe. Visit projectstarbeam.com and launch your message today. Now back to the episode.
So much before we started this project, I kind of knew that, okay, yes, a lot of people believe in aliens, but I had no idea that the like the Pew polls and the Gallup polls, in America anyway, were at like the 75% level and like the
Mhm.
80% level on, do people believe aliens exist somewhere,
Yep.
and even for like visitation, where we have the UFOs and the close encounters of the third kind, it's around 50%. And I mean, well, so if that gets someone hooked into, like we said, like if it gets someone hooked into sci-fi or developing technology or pursuing, oceanography, or, solving climate change, because we can do geoengineering, space engineering or whatever, um, then great. Yeah, this can make a big impact on the future of our species, the future of
Yep.
our culture. And now,
Uh,
I think that kind of does, because we're converging towards aliens. We had wanted to talk about Roswell.
okay. Yes, we do.
All right.
So,
So why don't you lead us off, Dr. Ditchson?
okay. Well, I'm sure that a lot of people are familiar with Roswell, New Mexico, where there was a UFO incident that occurred back in 1947, where a UFO, and I'll use the term UFO, okay, did crash, and there was debris found and so forth. And at the time, there was a lot of speculation as to UFO sightings and so forth and so on. And the U.S. military did get involved in the Roswell crash and so forth. And that to me, okay, what's amazing about that is that's kind of when the whole UFO, and I'll use the term conspiracy theories and everything, kind of launched at that point. And part of that, when I sit back and I look at it, was just the way that everything was handled from not only a media perspective, but the government perspective in terms of making sure that information wasn't quite publicly available. However, information that was sent out to the public eventually carried a lot of questions and so forth. And Roswell to me was, uh, quite the point within our culture in reference to UFOs and where we were headed. From the um,
So that's
UFO
really the
perspective.
beginning of the conspiracy theory era. Yeah, that's so what other conspiracy theories were there? None really. Like it really wasn't a thing. I guess during the war, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a lot going on in reference to, again, we had just pretty much exited World War II,
Right.
and we're, picking up all the pieces from that. Technology had evolved significantly, as we all know, during
Right.
the,
Like aviation
this is,
was still pretty new.
well,
I mean,
aviation was new, but
impressive, but new,
it was advancing relatively fast. Okay, but in parallel with that, we had the evolution of nuclear technology, everything from people trying to take a step back and look at producing energy to weaponization of nuclear materials as well. All right. So all those pieces, were kind of floating around out there. Now, in reference to Roswell, there's a lot of people who will come out and say that yes, the crash occurred. The U.S. government had retrieved multiple aliens, again, depending on who you who you hear this from and so forth, and that there's all kinds of archives and artifacts available and so forth. Um, that's in my opinion. Okay. Nobody has ever been directly able to come out and say, here's the absolute proof that aliens did land at Roswell or crash land and so forth. However, when you look at the amount of data that was gathered and then um, presented differently and so forth, you have to scratch your head and go, hmm, what were all the pieces going on behind the scenes here?
right, right. Because the weather balloons,
Mhm.
that was actually a real test program at the time, right? To do high altitude stuff,
Oh,
in preparation for NASA and whatnot.
yeah, a good one was Project Manhigh. Okay, where they basically took people up in these balloons to an extremely high altitude to see how they would do. Okay, like obviously sub-Earth orbit, but at the end of the day, these balloons would be brought back down with the volunteers that had gone up with them and so forth. But there are at least one incident that I'm aware of. There might have been another one where unfortunately the balloon malfunctioned and the astronaut had to I'll use the word astronaut because at that
Sure.
point in time they weren't quite I'm sorry, the pilot, if you will,
Yeah.
had
Sure. The guinea
had
pig.
to the guinea pig, there you go, okay, actually had to bail out of the balloon before it crashed. Okay. That all happened. There was about a 3 to 5 year period, kind of pre and post Roswell, roughly some overlap there, where there were a lot of experiments going on, airborne experiments and so forth. And you couple that with the way that the military as well as the media handled everything in that period of time. And you could scratch your head and go, okay, well, Roswell was just some kind of cover up or, la la la. Okay. At the end of the day, that's actually what they want everybody to believe. In other words, the true facts, have never really been out there. Now, we've had a couple of US presidents who've come out and said when they take office, they're going to find out what the whole story was behind Roswell, right?
That's right.
That'd be Jimmy Carter was one. Okay. Ronald Reagan was another. Uh, the two following him, Bush Senior as well as Bill Clinton never really did talk too much about that. Okay. But moving forward, okay,
I think Bill Clinton was interested in other things.
well, it could have been, but you know, but my but my point is over time, okay, as presidents have had the ability to basically get the truth and put it out there, we've never seen anything.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
and why is that? And that is that's a good question. Again, I'm not trying to pass judgment on the claim that aliens did indeed crash land at Roswell, but I'm saying there are so many components that are behind it, coupled with the science. You kind of have to scratch your head and go, hmm. Now, in parallel with all that, there were other UFO sightings and such in different places and so forth, which is eventually why the Air Force spun up Project Blue Book to try to really get their arms around that, or make sure that the information and such, be it, was it a government project, or was it really something that occurred, that information was managed and so forth in reference to getting it to the public.
Yeah. And I do, of course, it was much easier back then to keep a secret, without social media, without
Yeah.
rapid telecoms. Even by the 80s, there was a lot of information flowing around, so it was much harder to keep a secret, right? But back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, I mean, you just needed to. Well, I mean, what did they do with Los Alamos, right? They kept that for quite a while just by, building everything in a remote location and, quarantining people and whatnot. But, I find, yeah, I find myself sometimes thinking on well, just this level of secret would be impossible to keep. And then I also find myself on the level of thinking like, well, if it was if it was locked away and given to just a very few small companies, like if it was, okay, this is entrusted to Lockheed, this is entrusted to McDonnell Douglas, this is, to these defense contractors, maybe it could still be out there. Um, Certainly, the military is, and the federal government in the U.S. is sprawling. I mean, I'm Canadian, and we have a much smaller system. It's also super disorganized. Um, so but with the Pentagon, I believe one of the recent reports a few years back, the General Accountability Office reports, was that it had lost track of $2 trillion, that it wasn't sure where that had been spent. And so that kind of thing gives me, well, it gives me hope that maybe they just did actually lose track of their own program. It could still be real out there somewhere,
It could be.
you know.
The other thing I do want to say is, I do believe that something did crash at Roswell. I
Hmm.
100% believe it. Okay. Again, and this is kind of plays into what you were talking about there in reference to the programs and so forth that were being spun up at the time. Will we ever find out the real truth?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure the real truth is out there,
Was it an
but
enemy aircraft? Was it
yeah,
yeah.
was it was it part of Project Mogul, for example? Okay. Which was the high altitude measuring devices they were deploying to detect Soviet nuclear testing and whatnot. Okay.
Right, right.
Could have been part of that, but again, and which is kind of cute because between that and some of the other things, there was, like I said, there was about a 3 to 5 year overlap. And by the time news got around and so forth, you do have to wonder. But
Yeah.
I will say this, okay, in reference to the day something occurred. Yes, something did occur at Roswell. There was a crash, and I don't challenge that at all. I do believe that they found wreckage of some type and such. But again, moving forward from that, we still have no clear idea as to what they actually found or what actually occurred.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, high altitude ballooning is still something that's used for science in the military even to today. So, I mean, that's a very useful there's no, it works. So there's no reason to stop doing it, right? So it's definitely, it could just be a balloon that crashed,
Yeah. Well, I'm
but it could be
chuckling
a
because
highly
we've
secret balloon, right? So,
exactly. I'm chuckling because we've had a couple of those pass across our country in the
well,
last
yeah, exactly. The Chinese balloons, right? Yeah. And I mean, those, if you looked at the sensor arrays on those things, one of them, the sensor array that was hanging from the bottom was the size of a train car. It was
Right.
huge.
Right.
And yeah, yeah, very interesting. And I thought it was, it's kind of nice because we're going to be doing a regular segment here. We're going to be doing a UAP UFO segment every show because it's so popular. In talking to our audience, our early audience, and a lot of our community members, this is definitely something that has demand. But we are going to try and keep it historical. We're going to try and keep it science-based, but it is super fun. So Roswell, well, do we know if there are, EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities, as they're called in military circles? We're not sure. But what we've outlined today, with the fact that the Drake equation and what we know about astronomy from the exoplanets, and we know about life and the timelines of things can develop, there is definite possibility that even without something like warp drive, and this is why we mentioned and why we kind of bundled in the von Neumann probes with this, even with something without faster than light travel, if you just have to travel the slow way, it is very possible that in our asteroid belt, around Venus, around Saturn and Jupiter, farther out in the trans-Neptunian objects in the Kuiper belt, it is possible that you have huge alien bases. It is possible they're sending out UFOs, and they all got here with von Neumann probes. And it's a definite, real possibility. Nothing in science says that is impossible. And I mean, if the civilizations are out there. By the way, the estimates vary, but the current number is that it could be in the high tens in our galaxy, that there are intelligent civilizations with technology. So, the Galactic Federation that, what was his name? We were just talking about him today. Hillier. He was the Canadian Defense Minister and, a longtime politician. And towards the end of his life, he basically started writing books and saying that there's this Galactic Federation of aliens and that they're watching us and they're trying to help us preserve our civilization and our planet. And well, it's possible, even without faster than light. And so I guess that any closing remarks on that note?
Well, just kind of a fun thing is Roswell and the events that followed shortly after that. Okay, after the press releases and so forth by now, um, it triggered some pretty good UFO sci-fi movies back in the 50s.
That's true. That's true.
You
Little
know,
Green Men, right?
well, not only that, there was The Day the Earth Stood Still, which I think is kind of an epic movie and
Right.
so forth. But, I do, there is other life out there. And if anybody ever says, no, there can't be, or blah, 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 no, there is. Okay. I believe there's intelligent life out there.
Yeah.
And other intelligent life, like I said, may have observed us already and kind of shook their head and went, okay, moving on. Depending on where we're at. All right. And I say that as a joke, but I do think that um, we've been and are being observed. And that's that. These are all things that, we have to just, it's critical though that we keep the science behind it.
Yeah.
It's got to
Yeah.
be there. Okay.
Yeah.
Political propaganda and so forth is one thing. Okay. But, at the end of the day, making sure the science is behind everything that we're talking about, that's critical.
Yeah.
And
And it is difficult to do. You know, we're gonna veer into some territory um, where there's just no way of verifying a lot of things. But we can keep it plausible. We can definitely keep it plausible. And the disclosure movement, we're now, as of the time of recording here, we are now November 9th, and upcoming is actually another set. I think it's on the 11th. I might be wrong. It might have been delayed, but there's another set of UFO disclosure meetings happening in the U.S. House. So, you know, this is an ongoing thing, and I think in the current administration and the coming administration, there's a lot of interest in both. So this has some bipartisan interest in the states. Canada is, by the way, made an official announcement that they don't care. So I think it's what they said more accurately was that Canada is not monitoring any UFO or UAP activity, and we're leaving it up to private citizens. Our government just is not going to be documenting anything. So, what does that say? I don't know.
that's,
Maybe they're really in on it. I don't know. You know,
yeah, I was going to say, and maybe they already know, but
maybe they already know. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
But
but
it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time. And like you say, I believe life is out there as well. And you know, NASA is being extremely cautious. And it's a little frustrating. I mean, we've got some great rovers on Mars. We've got great experiments going out. Um, well, um, I believe we just launched Europa Clipper, which is that the Icy Moons Explorer? Um, we're going to be we're going to be looking at some of the prime targets, and already are looking some of the prime targets where there could be microbial life in the system. And NASA's being extremely cautious because they don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to be embarrassed, right?
right, right.
Um, but the fact that real money is being spent on this, and the benefits, if we discover life on Mars, and it turns out to have, say, use the same DNA or the same RNA or a different, whatever the answer is, like whatever the data is, if we discover life somewhere, that's going to be such a scientific revolution for us. That could really, I mean, for the von Neumann probes, if we discover some sort of, say, more robust version of how nature builds its things, because it's evolved on Mars in such a terrible environment. Well, that we might be able to use that for manufacturing. Suddenly you have a
Maybe.
new era of bio nano, right? Um, so yeah, it's an exciting time, and we're just on the edge of so many discoveries in
And
space. You know,
there's a couple things too to consider as well. Is okay. There's a lot to be learned in reference to life here on Earth, and we're still
yep,
learning about it. Okay. But in addition to that, there's a lot to be learned regarding life on Mars. And we still don't know enough. Okay. I do believe at one point in time, life at some level was thriving on Mars. And I
yep.
also believe too that
That seems
you
pretty
know,
clear from the evidence now. Yeah,
right. And I do believe too that somewhere on that planet, life still thrives. And I'm
yeah,
not saying, there's a bunch of Martians living under these mountains with giant UFO complexes or anything
yeah,
like
yeah. But
that.
some sort of bacteria,
Yeah, yeah,
microorganism,
yeah,
something. Yeah,
microorganism or something. But there are so many lessons that we can learn as Elon continues to push moving to Mars in reference to expanding humanity. I think it is the absolute right approach, and I
yeah,
think that again we have a lot that we can learn from that. But in addition to that, that'll help humanity as well because there could be lessons there too that we have not uncovered yet that
yeah,
will
yeah.
help. So
And we don't know, we don't know what we don't know, right?
yeah,
So unknown unknowns could be exactly what we need. This is one of the things that it has helped us actually, like say in geology, all of the moon studies helped terrestrial geology immensely. I mean, one of the reasons why we have better energy exploration, better better seismic equipment, all of this stuff, there was a knock-on effect from understanding, all the different planetary, it's not geology like Mars is aerology, but anyway, the geology of all these different bodies, and yeah, we just don't know. We just don't know what we can learn. And just come on and send a PIM on Project StarBeam. Join our community. You get a lifelong membership if you send a PIM. Come on with us, and we're gonna discover the future.
Before we go, we have an exciting opportunity for you. You can present Project StarBeam as an official ambassador and earn great returns on selling PIMs or other merchandise. Whether you send your own PIMs, represent the project, or even just share the project and podcast with others, everything supports our educational programs for students in need. Want to know more? Visit projectstarbeam.com/orientation.